So recently I was scrolling through Twitter and I came across this one tweet posting this clip from Mission Impossible Rogue Nation.
It's not your decision to make, Ethan! I am a field agent. I know the risks. More than that, I am your friend. No matter what I tell the polygraph every week. Now, you called me because you needed my help. And you still do. So I am staying.
It's a perfectly serviceable dialogue scene, not exactly Shakespeare, but it gets the job done. I didn't see anything particularly egregious about it. And then I looked at the caption on the tweet, which just reads, "What's with this Disney Channel-ass dialogue?" followed by 3 crying emojis. Now, I don't know this random Twitter person, and I have absolutely no intention of starting a beef with them, but this just struck me as a really weird criticism to make. I gather that the idea is supposed to be that the dialogue is somehow corny or cheesy, which, yeah, that's something you can say about pretty much all the Mission Impossible movies, mostly in a good way. But what's so particularly cheesy about this scene? The only explanation I can offer is that this Twitter user believes that Benji's sincere declaration of friendship to Ethan is like something you'd find in a Disney Channel show. And that got me thinking about how Hollywood has basically spent the last decade training its audiences to reject sincerity in blockbusters as exactly that. As something corny or silly to be treated with snark and derision by the audience who are too grown up for such childish things as being concerned for the well-being of one's friend, I guess. If you're going to have a scene like this, you'd better immediately follow it up with Benji saying, "God, I sound like something out of a Disney Channel show, don't I?" Because the only way to be taken seriously as a blockbuster nowadays is to just have the characters constantly talk about how goofy everything around them is. And that's basically what I want to talk about today. About a style of dialogue in modern blockbusters that online communities have recently started to sum up with a single phrase.
Say the line, Bart!
Well, that just happened.
Yay!
So what is, well, that just happened humor, exactly? Well, put simply, it refers to a style of humor where something weird or shocking happens in a movie and the character responds to it by wryly remarking, "Well, that just happened." Most people seem to agree that the earliest example of this phrase being used was in the 2000 film State and Maine.
So that happened.
Now, ironically, even though this is the go-to example that people tend to use when discussing how modern blockbusters are overusing this style of humor, that exact phrase is actually not as common in movies as you might expect based on that fact. In fact, the line doesn't actually appear in any Marvel Cinematic Universe films, but it does show up in Denis Villeneuve's Arrival.
Yeah, that just happened.
So if this joke isn't actually used in that many major movies, and the only recent example I could find was from a critically acclaimed, Oscar-nominated 2016 science fiction drama from one of the most respected auteurs working today, why has it become such a punching bag on Twitter in the last couple of years? Well, even if that specific joke doesn't pop up in that many movies, it still perfectly exemplifies the style of humor that modern blockbusters are becoming increasingly reliant on. Every character is a deadpan snark machine who constantly feels the need to assure the audience that they know what you just saw was weird and goofy, so you don't have to feel silly for enjoying it. It's basically a way of assuring the audience that you're watching a cool superhero movie that isn't afraid to poke fun at how silly it is because it's for grown-ups. There are actually a few different subcategories of jokes that all fall under the "well, that just happened" banner. Examples include superhero's name/costume is silly.
No one said Superman. That might be a little on the nose.
You call yourself Batman.
Yeah. I don't call myself Super Batman.
Character repeats what just happened to them out loud.
I just move shit with my freaking mind! Yeah, okay, that is something I do now.
Sincere emotional moment gets punctured by a snarky quip.
Did you miss me?
I'm sorry, what are we watching? Because this
Is
are you
this
two?
new? Because I hate it.
Or the old classic, character repeats another character's name but incorporates the word "what" into it.
The Illuminati will see you now.
The Illuminati?
The rise of this style of humor is generally traced back to Joss Whedon, the now-disgraced writer-director who helped to popularize this style with his television work on Buffy and Firefly in the late 90s.
That sounds like something out of science fiction. You live in a spaceship, dear.
Obviously, we now all know that Whedon is a piece of shit, but as hard as this may be to believe, there was a time where he was one of the most influential figures in all of nerd culture. And when he brought his signature brand of self-referential, quip-heavy humor to Marvel's first Avengers movie, the result was met with critical approval and box office success. And since Hollywood studios are always on the lookout for a formula that they can perfect for financial gain, this style of humor quickly became Marvel's default. But that hasn't always been for the best. Take, for example, the scene in Captain America Civil War where the Avengers are all fighting in an airport because politics and shit. I won't deny that it's a fun scene, but it has a major tonal problem. This is supposed to be a scene where the heroes are forced to turn on each other, where longtime friends have to betray one another for what they believe is the right cause, which makes it pretty jarring when they're constantly having exchanges like this in the middle of the battle.
We're still friends, right?
Depends on how hard you hit me.
It's hard to feel like there's any weight to what we're watching on screen because the characters aren't treating this situation with the gravity that the movie wants us, the audience, to. Why should I be invested in seeing these characters fight when the movie has literally stopped in its tracks to assure its audience that it's all hunky-dory and they're still besties for the resties? It's a classic case of Marvel trying to have their cake and eat it too. Playing around with the idea of going to more emotionally charged places with these characters, but also being too afraid that they'll lose their audience if they ease up on the jokes even for a little bit. To its credit, the movie holds back on lines like this during the final fight between Iron Man and Captain America, but by the end it feels the need to end on this lighthearted moment from Tony Stark that assures us he's not really mad at Captain America, and when the Avengers reunite 2 years later, we don't really have any sense that there's any real lasting animosity between them. The same year as Captain America Civil War, we saw the release of Batman vs Superman: Dawn of Justice, the second entry in what was once the DC Extended Universe, and the movie whose critical reception effectively dug DC into a hole that they've been trying to get themselves out of ever since. I don't think Batman vs Superman is a particularly good movie. It's pretty messy and convoluted, and it dedicates way too much of its runtime to some of the most obnoxious attempts at sequel setup that I've ever seen in a film. But most of the negative reviews zeroed in on how dark and self-serious it was. So the lesson Hollywood ended up taking away from the success of Marvel and the backlash to Batman vs Superman was, audience like it when superhero makes smart-ass joke, and they don't like it when superhero is sad. And this effectively led to an overcorrection where sincerity is dead and smug irony reigns supreme. I surely don't need to recount what happened with Justice League, where Warner Brothers used Zack Snyder's departure due to a terrible tragedy to bring in Joss Whedon and effectively turn it into a Marvel clone, resulting in stuff like this.
I take it back. I want to die. I hear you can talk to fish.
Well, I knew you didn't bring me back because you like me.
Dostoevsky.
Yeah. Oh, something is definitely bleeding.
Man, my toes hurt. I don't even understand the physics of how my toes hurt.
I get it!
Again, I'm not the biggest fan of Zack Snyder's work personally, but I can admire how he commits to this idea of looking at these comic book characters through a more mythic lens. And in our rush to dismiss that and make fun of it, I think we ended up sending the wrong message to Hollywood about what exactly we want to see from these kinds of movies. Because the thing is, it's not just superhero movies that are becoming reliant on this style of humor now. It's all over Hollywood. As Marvel became the dominant film franchise of the 2010s, more studios started to follow their example, to the point where it's really just getting beyond parody now.
Can you fly a helicopter?
Does the back of your head look like a huge penis? The answer is yes!
You must be Lloyd.
What gave it away?
The white pants, the trash stash, it leans Lloyd.
Did I watch you cut a guy with a decorative serving platter?
And when nearly every movie is relying so heavily on jokes like this, it contributes to the assembly line feeling of the modern blockbuster industry. These movies are so concerned with being hip and cool that they feel the need to take you out of the story just to remind you that they are in fact in on the joke. 2018's Aquaman isn't a masterpiece by any stretch of the imagination. I saw it once in the cinema and haven't really thought about it much since then. But one thing about that movie that sticks out in my memory is that there's this one scene in the underwater kingdom where the film just casually shows you an octopus playing the drums. This is normally where you might expect character A to look at character B and say something along the lines of, "Is that an octopus playing the drums? That's an octopus playing the drums." But no, the characters don't feel the need to point this out to us, and the scene isn't really played that heavily for laughs. It's just this weird, fun, goofy aspect of this world that isn't ashamed or self-conscious of how silly it is. It kind of rules. And speaking of water-themed blockbusters, another recent tentpole movie that was admirably confident and assured in what it was Avatar: The Way of Water. The first movie became a bit of a punching bag on the internet for years because it's kind of cheesy and unabashedly earnest, but The Way of Water dares to suggest that maybe that's not such a bad thing. And then outside of Hollywood you have movies like RRR, which is this unabashedly over-the-top and melodramatic action epic that's all about the bond between bros and features a random musical number halfway through, and it's amazing. But to be clear, I'm not saying that sardonic humour in blockbusters is inherently a bad thing. Even some Marvel movies have actually used it pretty well. The Guardians of the Galaxy movies, for example, use it very effectively to communicate things about the characters. Star-Lord has been stuck in a state of arrested development since he was abducted from Earth as a child, so naturally he has the sense of humour of a cocky teenager. Rocket Raccoon's entire arc in the second movie is about how he's afraid of being emotionally vulnerable, so he overcompensates with obnoxious jokes in an intentional attempt to push people away. In a way, Rocket is kind of a deconstruction of the snarky, quippy hero that we've become so accustomed to seeing in movies these days. But importantly, writer-director James Gunn mostly knows when to pull back and just let an emotional scene play out without it being punctured by another joke. He trusts that his audience is invested enough in these characters that they don't need to be constantly winked at in order to enjoy watching them. So again, it's not necessarily a bad thing for a blockbuster to poke fun at itself once in a while. But it shouldn't come at the cost of sincere emotion. There's something admirable about a blockbuster just owning how earnest it is, and not letting the worry that audiences might laugh at it or call it lame dictate how it presents itself. Because if a fairly standard dialogue scene from Mission Impossible 5 can go viral for supposedly being comparable to a Disney Channel show, then frankly it's no wonder that so many studios are instead opting for the Marvel approach. And maybe we could do to let these people know that we actually can handle genuine, sincere moments of emotion in our movies. Just a thought.